Just two opening questions. Over and over again in this committee and others, we have heard the intelligence and national security professionals of our country and people who study those issues professionally warn us that campaign and election interference by the Russians is not going away, that we can expect more of it in the 2018 election, that we can expect more of it in the 2020 election. What I would like to know from you is the name of a person in the Department of Justice whose job it is to look at that and make recommendations to the Senate as to what legislative remedies we should pursue to prevent that warned of activity from happening. Is there such a person, and what is his or her name?
Well, I think it would fall within our National Security Division, which is led by Dana Bente, who also was appointed U.S. Attorney by President Obama in Northern Virginia.
So
but we need, I'll be frank, I don't know that we're doing a specific legislative review at this point.
Do you think it would be prudent to do
well,
you make review? We have been warned.
I take that as a suggestion, and I know that with your time in the Department of Justice, you could contribute to that discussion. So I would be glad to discuss it with you.
Similarly, there is an executive order out of the White House regarding cybersecurity that is more or less for information from various cabinet departments. To my knowledge, there has been no proposed legislation of any kind. My conversations with Mr. Bossert at the White House have not produced any type of liaison or way of going forward on this issue. As you know, there are multiple congressional committees that touch on cybersecurity, and it really complicates life if there is not somebody at the Department of Justice whose job it is to work with us on cybersecurity legislation. And the silence has been deafening. If you could get me a name of a person whose responsibility is at the Department of Justice to work with the Senate on cybersecurity legislation, that, I think, would help move things forward.
I will do that, and because there are two levels of it. First, at any time, I hope that you would call our legislative affairs and say, I want to talk about legislation.
Well,
secondly,
you know, the reason I have to bring this up with you here right now is that we have a lot of trouble getting answers to anything out of the Department of Justice. I've got a list here of unanswered mail. January 30, 2017 letter, unanswered. February 17, 2017 letter, unanswered. March 7, 2017 letter, renewed September 15, 2017, unanswered. May 26, 2017 letter, unanswered, renewed July 27, 2017, unanswered. July 11, 2017 letter, renewed September 26 and October 17th, unanswered. September 26 letter, unanswered. So please don't refer me to the people who are supposed to be in charge of this relationship when they won't even answer my mail.
Well,
months and months and
my new director was just confirmed recently, and we've cut the backlog by half, and we're going to continue to cut that backlog, and we'll get on that. But I guess another thing, knowing that you are particularly knowledgeable about these complex issues,
the cybersecurity
you would like,
issue.
yes, you would like to talk to an attorney who's actually working the cases and has dealt with the issues in more.
Yeah, I've been over to see the FBI guys who run that shop, and so yeah, I'm up to speed on that side. The issue is there are things we need to fix legislatively on cybersecurity, and at the moment I can't find a point of entry into this administration of anybody who is working on cybersecurity legislation or is appointed to or delegated to. So that's the person that I need about legislation, not just an update on cases. I'm pretty familiar with that stuff. Okay?
I understand.
So, executive privilege. We talked about it a little bit. The reason I sent you the letter would be so that you'd be prepared to talk about executive privilege, and this wouldn't be a gotcha moment. But let me ask if the November 4th, 1982 executive order by President Reagan is still the guideline under which the department operates, or have you changed that guideline?
That is a part of the principles that we operate under, yes.
It is the document that describes how the executive branch will respond to executive privilege, correct?
Well, it's that and case law and other executive documents that have been issued over the years.
So here's what I let me know if any of this has changed. That rule says that executive privilege will be asserted only in the most compelling circumstances and shall not be invoked without specific presidential authorization. Is that still the rule?
Repeat that.
Executive privilege will be asserted only in the most compelling circumstances and shall not be invoked without specific presidential authorization.
Executive privilege cannot be invoked except by the president.
Congressional requests for information shall be complied with as promptly and as fully as possible, unless it is determined that compliance raises a substantial question of executive privilege. Is that still the rule?
That's a good rule.
The Attorney General has the authority to determine on his own that executive privilege shall not be invoked. You can make the decision not to invoke executive privilege yourself.
Well, the Attorney General does not have the power to invoke it, period. Only the president can.
But you can determine that it shall not be invoked. You have the negative power to allow questions to be answered and documents to be released as not violating executive privilege. You can make that determination under paragraph 3, correct?
I'm not sure about that.
All right, well.
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm reading aloud. So the department head, the Attorney General, and the Council of the President may, in the exercise of their discretion in the circumstances, determine that executive privilege shall not be invoked and release the requested information. The Attorney General says it right there.
Well, I don't believe they can do it without the approval of the president.
They can't release information. Of course they have to be able to release information without the approval of the president. You do it all the time.
Well, I guess you're talking about core, but not about core privileges of the executive branch, such as private conversations between his top cabinet people.
Even for that, there's still this rule that the issue has to be presented to the president. You have a moment, what they call a request of the congressional body to hold its request for information in abeyance. You have a period of abeyance you're allowed to ask for under the executive order while you get the presidential determination if you're going to assert executive privilege. But sooner or later, the claim of executive privilege must be made with the specific approval of the president. And my concern is that this period of abeyance has turned into a non-assertion of executive privilege. We have questions that we've asked you about going back to your Intelligence Committee appearance in June or July. I mean, how long a period of abeyance do you need to get the answer from the White House as to whether these questions are protected or not? You can't have a situation in which the president never has to assert it and the abeyance goes on indefinitely. Don't you agree with that?
Well, I think you make a point, but the burden is on those who want to breach a core privilege of the president, which is private conversations with his attorney general, to show precisely what it is that you'd like him to waive it on. And that's what your letter failed in. It was sort of reverse.
Okay.
It said you have to tell us what you're going to do, want to talk about, and
for the record,
what you're not going to talk about. And I think it needs to be.
It was intended to refer to the questions as to which you had asserted a interim executive privilege.
Okay.
So we'll follow up on that, and we'll have more time.
Yeah. But I do
specific questions asked of you in the Intelligence Committee, and we'll pursue when I have more time.
And just briefly, I have to say that the executive branch is a co-equal branch, and you would not want someone demanding to know who you talk to in your office, your counsel, your chief of staff. Neither would we want to be prowling willy-nilly through the Supreme Court, what their clerks knew and what they were told by the justice as leading up to some decision that's not popular. So I would just urge us all to first and foremost respect the legitimacy of any president's right to seek advice in confidence. Eisenhower is reported to have said, if one of my advisors reports the advice they gave me during the day, they'll be fired that night. I mean, this is not a little matter. It's all I'm saying.